Okay, hello everybody. My name is Dare. Welcome back to the HTML camp. We're on day 7, I believe now, or day 6, I'm not too sure. But yeah, let's just get started. So last camp we discussed CSS and styling our work in HTML, styling our web pages. But this camp we're coming back to just learning some more HTML elements again and more fundamentals to our web page. And our focus for today's camp are HTML forms. So if you give me a second, I'm just going to turn on my laser pointer. But yeah, we're going to be discussing forms in HTML and how we can create them. So some of you might not be familiar, but what is an HTML form? Well, an HTML form is just a normal form written in HTML. An HTML form is also just commonly called a web form because web and HTML translate basically to the same thing. They can serve many different purposes for many different web pages, HTML forms, and yeah, so it's an online page that takes and stores user input in some type of database. So, more terms we're talking about here that we need to discuss. So, what is a database? A database is a place where data is saved and stored. A database system is a system that manages and determines the function of the database itself. So, a database system, the system of the database, and the database itself are kind of like two different things. With a database, the collection of data is usually organized in a way that allows it to be easily accessible. So in a form, we give it user input, we give something to it, and then usually what would happen is that when that user submits the form or they send it to wherever, whatever they inputted gets saved somewhere. And where that gets saved is called the database. And the database system is basically like how it's organized and how it's saved. So maybe what information is saved. So for example, maybe on like a sign up web page, you could ask somebody to enter in some useless information like their favorite color and stuff. But maybe you want to save only a specific part of the data. So maybe you only want to save their age because that's all you actually care about. But yeah, so that's a database. So just a place where data is saved and stored. And if you don't remember when we said data, data basically translates to meaning the word information or info. And yeah, so here's an example, like a real world example that we're going to try to like make an analogy out of. This is going to be a school quiz. So things we know about a school quiz is that it takes in the student's input, right? And when I say input all the time, I mean it takes in something that the other person does. Uh, like kind of like if I ask for your input on something, I'm asking you to respond and tell me what you think about something. And input's just like something from another person that's not you, really, or something from something. Um, so yeah, something about a school quiz is that takes in student input. Something else is that typically once it's filled out, the quiz, the student submits it to the teacher, and then the teacher goes ahead and stores that student's quiz to the teacher's cabinet. And I just say teacher's cabinet, but they just store it wherever they like. Of course, it might not be a teacher's cabinet, but from what I've seen, I think it's usually a cabinet. So yeah, so here, if we translate this, we can say that the student is equivalent to the user on our web page. The teacher is equivalent to the database system, and the teacher's cabinet is the database because that's where the data actually lies. So uh, this is just a school quiz, so we can answer the question, we can fill it out, and when we answer a question or we give an opinion on something, or we just put it inside this quiz and we jot it down, that's basically us putting in our input. So once we filled it out with our input, all the places where it asks for us to input, we filled it out. We can go on to submit it to the teacher, so we can just hand the paper over to them. And after that, the teacher, the database system, sorry, that's how it gets organized. So it decides how it's organized, right? Because sure, you can have a database, but it's not going to be that useful if you're not able to pull things out of it and also put things in it easily. So it's important to have a good database system so the input is easily accessible. Because for say, maybe after a little bit, you want to see what mark you got on the quiz, right? Because you're studying for it. If the teacher didn't organize herself and they if they didn't put your quiz somewhere clearly and they just put it wherever they saw an open space in, and they did that for all the other students, that would make it pretty hard for them to find your quiz, and it would just complicate things. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So in this example, student is just the user, of course, could be like the user on a web page. The teacher is the database system. So how it's being organized basically decides what's being organized and how. And the teacher's cabinet in this specific case is the database. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you have any questions along the way, you can put them in chat in the comments and I'll do my best to reply to them. So here's another example of a real life form. So forms take in user input, and we know that. So immediately here, this is an application form for employment form, I guess, and we can just see that by the title. And immediately here, we can see the input that's getting taken over. It's taking in the name, it's taking in the last name, the first name, the middle name, the date, the social security number, just a bunch more questions like their education, and just a whole bunch of other stuff probably related to what you need to have for employment. Um, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Sorry, I'm going to mute my phone. So hopefully that makes sense before, and that's just another example of a form. So it's just collecting input, and then probably once we finished creating this form, or sorry, once we finished filling out this form, we probably want to go ahead and submit it to something. So I don't really know how that would work in this case. Probably work just by sending it in the mail, or if this was like a digital document, you'd send it to an email or something. But yeah. So here's an example of an HTML form. So not all forms need to be complicated like this, or like this last. This one's not too complicated. It doesn't need to be like these ones. This needs to look like this. Forms just need to take in user input, right? And if you remember, a lot of things take in user input, and sign-up pages do that as well. So this is the Facebook sign-up form. This might be outdated now, but this I'm pretty sure is still accurate. So this form takes in the first name, the last name, the mobile number or email, a new password again, and then their birthday, and then their gender. So yeah, this is an example of a sign-up form, and this one's just taken from Facebook.com specifically. So hopefully that is clear so far. So once again, it's taking in user input. And if you notice something else, I'm just going to mention this now because we're going to touch back on this later. But we don't always just need to have the user type in something in order for it to be a form. So sure, for the first name, last name, email, and new password, we're typing in something. But we can also just have things like checkboxes that they can select. In this case, I believe these are called radios. We'll just call them checkboxes for now because we can check one of these and it'll apply that to our input. So yeah, we can take an input in multiple ways. It can be from checkboxes. In this case, this one's a drop down, so you can choose different things. And yeah. So here are just some types of forms. So you have contact forms for contacting people, of course, you probably put in your phone number there. You have billing forms where you're getting billed probably, and you put in your billing information like credit cards and stuff. You have sign-up forms, which we just looked at. We have application forms. We looked at that as well. We have shipment request forms. Simply having something shipped to you. Maybe you're using a platform like Amazon and you order something online. You probably have to fill out your address unless if you already had done that before. That's an example of a form because you have to give stuff there. And you have contract and agreement forms. So that's like when you're signing a contract or like you're agreeing to terms of service or something. Usually these look really simple. It's like when you're using a brand new app or something, and it's just simply you checkbox something, you can move on. But yeah. So that's enough about forms. Hopefully we understand web forms in the real world. Or sorry, web forms and also forms in the real world. So now let's look into creating our own. So the form tag uses an HTML element called form, and the form tag, it defines a form between its opening and closing tags in HTML. So our form goes in between the opening form tag, and then we close off the form tag once we're done. So the next tag we need to know as well is, this one's pretty important. It's the input tag. So to take user input, you need to use the input tag. The input tag specifies an input field where a user can enter in data. The input element is the most important form element, as I've already mentioned. So this pretty much, the input tag defines the place where the user can enter in their input. So they can enter in data, and remember, data just means information. So the input type attribute. So type is an attribute for input, and it's also pretty important. The type attribute specifies the type of input element to display. When I say input element, I was referring to those things like the places where we can just type, the checkboxes, and there are the drop downs, and just a whole lot of other options. So yeah, the type attribute specifies the type of input element to display. If the type attribute is not specified, the default type is text. So this might not make too much sense right now, but we're going to come back to this afterwards once we look at some examples. So the value of the type attribute can be text, password, checkbox, submit, and many others. So these are just some of the ones we're going to be touching on today, but there are a lot more. Maybe if we have extra time, we'll look into that as well. So here's what it looks like. We have the input tag like this. We have the type attribute. We have our equal signs, quotations, and here we pass a value. So in this case, a value we're passing is kind of like a predefined value. So we just need to call one of the like already existing values in order for it to work. So text is one of them, and all it does is create a text box like this over here. So we can actually press on this box and we'll be able to type on it. Here's just when I typed in it. And yeah, so the user would be able to type within the text box with just this code. So now we've changed the type again to password. So this still pretty much does the same exact thing, creates a text box, but now it shows it as dots instead of actual letters that we can see. And if you're wondering why it does this, I think the reason it does this is in case if you have like somebody beside you, or maybe you're in like a public space and you don't want people to see your password, it hides it like this. So only you know what you're typing, or if somebody's carefully looking at your keyboard, I guess they would also know. So yeah, that's if we change it to password, if we change the value of the type attribute to password. And if we can go touch back on what I was saying earlier on this slide about it setting the default value to text, that means if we don't pass any type attribute over here, if we completely skip this part of the code where we write in type equals text and we just put the input tag, it will still show the text box with text in it because that's the default set. If we want anything else besides text, it's necessary for us to have the type attribute and to pass a value with it. So hopefully that's clear. Once again, if you have any questions, you can comment them throughout the entire thing we've done here, or it could even be a question about something we did last camp or the camps before that. So here we're using a different value now for type. It's checkbox, and this just creates one checkbox. So in order for this probably to be effective, or actually maybe in most scenarios, you're probably going to want to have more than one checkbox as well. So you probably want to include this twice in your code. So in this case, I just did a simple shortcut just to get text beside it. I simply just wrote the text outside of the tag. And yeah, that was just something I did quickly to just get the text beside it. Of course, I could style this more with CSS and do a lot of other things, but this was just one way I want to show this. So now the user is able to check one of these boxes. So they can check boy or they can check girl. And if we're going back to that terms of a service agreement and like how these checkboxes there, maybe we could have like a long paragraph reading something, or we could just put at the end a checkbox and we could say, I agree. And if the user checkboxes that means they agree. So yeah, this is what it looks like. So for each checkbox you have, you need to have a new input tag. So another one now, we have input and then we have the type submit. So submit actually just creates a button for us. And then with the submit, we need one more attribute. Might be a little bit confusing, but the name of this attribute is called a value. So it's not the value for the attribute itself like here, but it's actually called value. And we want to set that equal to done. Or actually, we don't need to set it equal to done. We can set it equal to whatever we'd like to, because this is just the text that appears within our submit button. So yeah, value is its own HTML attribute, and you want to make sure you don't mess up the value attribute with an actual value of an attribute. So when I say value of an attribute, I mean those stuff in between the quotations. And when I say the value attribute, I just mean the actual attribute that exists in HTML. So yeah, in this case, you, the user, would be able to press done and possibly have it lead to another page. We could connect a link to this. So I think we've looked at this well, but we're looking at placeholder now. So here we're just using the type text, and now we're using another attribute called placeholder. So pretty much what placeholder does is that just puts a little bit like of gray text over there, like where it says first name. So this isn't actually written here. It just is basically a title for that box, if that makes sense. So the user knows they're entering in their first name here. And we can look at the Facebook example. I believe they also do that as well. Yeah, so they do the exact same thing here. They're using a placeholder with inside of their input boxes. Once again, this is just all styled with CSS. So yeah, we can do that as well, just like this with the placeholder attribute. So I think I have an example up here. Yeah, I have some example code up here about a form basically that was built. Once again, this doesn't look too good, of course, because we didn't style it with CSS. It's just using the basic components. But we're going to try creating our own, and then we're going to look at some more values for the type attribute. And then we're probably going to call that the end of the camp. So this was a bit of a shorter camp today. So let's see what's going on in this form. So remember, with our form, we use the form tag to define it. So we have our opening form tag. And then after that, now we're putting in our form information. So you see I put an H1 tag here, but that's just because I'm able to, and I just want to put a title for my actual form. So I put food shipment request form, and we can see that pop up over here. So on the next line now, we have our first input tag. So in this case, as you can see, we're taking in just pure text from the user. And we also created a placeholder that says first name. And you can see that pop up over here. When we have another one, same exact thing, except now the placeholder says last name. So it says it over here as well. Then we have some line breaks. I just used the BR tag pretty much as a cheat to do this because I didn't want to also have to show CSS code on the side. But yeah, then we have a placeholder for country, just pure text again. And we have another placeholder for street address, and it's just a line break again. So after all of that, that's the four things you see here. We have another heading 3, and it's types of foods. So in this case, it's just a bunch of checkboxes, and we can checkbox what we'd like to order, and then we can press the button at the end to submit it. So if you notice already, I didn't mention this, the input tag itself does not need a closing tag. So it's one of those tags. In this case, we just put our / inside of our opening tag like that. So it's pretty much just only a closing tag we have here. But yeah, hopefully that's clear, and that's an example of a form. So let's play around with this ourselves now. Let's go full screen over here, and let's create a form example. And yeah, so we're working inside HTML, of course, and let's write out the first thing we need. So the first thing we need, I need to define my form. So what I'm going to use is the form tag like that. So I can actually just close that off right now, honestly. So I'll close that as well. And now I want to start creating things within my form. So this is the part where I can pretty much get a little bit more creative because it's up to me. So let's also create a title for this form. Let's do a different type of form. Can you zoom in, please? Oh yeah, my bad, I'll zoom in. Let's go like that. Hopefully you can read that now. Thank you for saying that. So yeah, let's do a different type of form. Let's just say, let's have the form go like this. So I'm going to go and then I'm going to just, what should I say here? I'll say, I'm just going to type in blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to copy and paste that a couple times. And then you'll see what I'm trying to do. Let me actually copy and paste the space with that, I guess. 1 second. There we go. Just going to do that a couple times. Let's run this. And we see our output here like that. So let's zoom out a little bit. I think that's good. And now what we're going to do after we've done this is that we're going to come over here and I'm just going to create an input thing down here that's just going to basically make them check boxes. So I'm going to say input, opening input tag. And I'm going to put the type now because I'm setting it to something that's not text, right? I'll show you actually what would happen if I didn't do it. Like that. I just tried to save it. We run this. We see that we just have a text box, right? And once again, that's the default value. So if we don't pass a type, but we're going to pass a type here. And the type is going to be equal to, what was the checkbox, right? Like that. Let's run this. And we see it became a checkbox now. So simply all I'm going to do is above, I'll say, please, I'm going to put a p tag and I'm going to say, please check box if you agree. And I'm going to close that off here as well, like so. I said please check box. I can say please hit the checkbox if you agree. Please click the checkbox if you agree. So this is a pretty simple example. This doesn't look too great, but of course we're going to change this to make this better. Another example of something I could do, because pretty much here, in this case, it was just going to be like a terms of agreement. So maybe it's some type of contract here, and then we'd have them check the checkbox if they agree. But another thing we could do is instead of having it like this, we could have a type of form or a type of web page where maybe it's a quiz, right? Maybe it's like an online quiz you want them to take, and depending on their answers, it displays something or it tells them something. So to do that, it's probably just going to be filled with a lot of checkboxes. So it might look something like this. So I'll say math quiz. Once again, all this other stuff I'm putting with the normal text. This is just how I'm choosing to do it in a quick way. Of course, you can have your H1 out of it. Maybe you don't want to use H1 and use a P tag, and you just want to style that P tag. Yeah, this is just how I'm doing it for the basic layout. And then after math quiz, I'll ask a question. I'll say, what is 5 plus 3? Like that. Put a question mark. And then I can have multiple options down here. So I could just fill it with input. Just copy and paste that a couple times. We'll just do 3 options. Like that. Type is going to be, we're going to use a different type. We're going to use the type radio. And you'll see what that looks like in a second. Just only need to copy and paste this. Type radio, like that. And then I can put whatever options I want. So I'll just do it. I guess I'll just do it straight outside. First option is going to be 8. Second option is going to be 7. Third option is going to be 10. I'm going to run. Actually, just to make it look a little bit nicer, once again, I'm just going to skip using CSS because I'm just going to keep it simple for now. I'm just going to use a BR tag like that just to break up the lines. So I'm using the BR tag just so everything can display on its own line, because as you can see here, it's not doing that. They're in line together. And that tells us actually, with just looking at that, that tells us that the input tag is an inline element, right? Because it's staying all on the same line together. So let's run that. Now we see they're all on their own line. And yeah, so you can imagine we could have a longer quiz than this. We could fill out our input like this. So in this case, this is a bit broken because we can't uncheck it with radio, but let's do checkbox instead. That's what a radio looks like. It's just simply that as a what's it called now? Check box. Run. I can check whatever I think is the right answer now. And yes, that's just another simple example of collecting input. So there's a lot you can do with this. There's actually a lot of things you can do with this. And I recommend you learn how I recommend you check out like doing things with CSS to create even or a lot nicer looking forms, because this is once again just the basic like bone structure of it. This is just the basic code, but with CSS you can do a lot of things to make this look nicer. But let's see. I want to do one more thing, I think. Oh yeah, let's do the submit button. So at the end, we want the user to submit something, right? So let's see how we would do that. So remember, we have input. We have input like that. And then after that, now we have type, and then the type is equal to submit. So now that we've done that, remember with this one, if we're doing submit, we need to pass one more value. And the value we pass is value. That's what it's called. And then here, where you can put in whatever we want the button to say. So let's leave this empty for now. I think that, yeah, this is what the button looks like when we leave it empty. So also just put a line break, so it's going to be on its own line. So this is what the button looks like when it's empty. I can just press on it and it'll take me to nowhere because it's not set to take me to anywhere. But if I go like this, just ignore this for now. If I go like this and I set the value to press this button to submit, and we run this out here. If we look at our output here, we see this is what displays on our button now. So we just changed simply whatever we want our button to say right over here in the value. So yeah, this is what it looks like. So you might be wondering, earlier when I was talking about creating forms, I told you that it collects user input, and typically you go save that user input in a database so that data can be accessed later, right? The information the user said could be accessed later. So maybe I want it to say, after I checkbox something and I press submit, maybe I want it to tell the user if they got it right or wrong. So how would we go about doing that? So we're not going to learn how to do that today because that's touching on a different language. But this third language we see when we mess with Code Playground, JS, that's short for JavaScript. And that's the language we need to do stuff like this. So JavaScript is what we use. It's a scripting language. And it's it's the language we use to do stuff like this with HTML to like create basically decisions, I guess you could call it, when we're checkboxing one of these and we're making one of these checkboxes active to submit it. But yeah, if you're wondering how we could do that, so you can do a little bit of research on your own for JavaScript. But for now, let's just keep going with the basic HTML fundamentals. I think in the future is going to be a camp for JavaScript as well. But yeah, so that's pretty much like the main stuff we touched on for today's camp. Somebody asked, can you actually check the checkbox? Yeah, we can check mark the checkboxes. We can choose what we'd like. But yeah, so if you're wondering once again how we actually get this to submit somewhere so we can get return to value, right? Because in this case, what would happen is that the user would submit this, maybe it'd be sent to the database and be evaluated to see if it's actually correct or wrong. And then after that, it would return the user to maybe a different web page, or maybe the same web page would get updated with if they were right or wrong. So yeah, to do something like that requires JavaScript, and maybe we'll touch on that later. But we're just going to keep focusing on HTML for now, maybe a bit more CSS. So I think that's all for today's camp. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll wait a little bit longer to see if we have any questions. Yeah, I won't end the camp yet. I'll see if we get any questions. But let's do that one last thing I actually wanted to look at. So I wanted to look at some more type values for input. So I'm just going to simply type in input type attribute. Let's see what results we get. Or I can honestly just look at form itself. So yeah, look right over here, attribute values. So there's button, there's checkbox, there's color, of course, that's just from other stuff. Date, time, local, email. These are just all stuff we can pass with it in the type. Then we have file, hidden, image, month, number, password, radio, range, reset, search, submit, telephone, I believe, text, time, URL, week. Yeah, so there's a good amount of stuff. So I recommend you look into all of these. Let's play with date. Let's play with just date, actually. So let's see what happens if we do this. So I'm going to erase all this stuff we did over here. And then I'll just say a date. So I'll go like input. And then I'll say type equals date. Can you post the link, please, Adere? Can you zoom in? Sorry, I'm not too sure. Oh, the link to the page I was looking at, maybe. Okay, yeah, sure. So this is the page I was looking at just to look at some more attributes. Once again, it's the same website we looked at last time as well. W3 Schools when we were looking at some CSS properties. But yeah, so I can say input type is date. I can run this. And look, I get to enter in a date and stuff. So this is not going to look the same for you, depending on your web browser, but this is what it looks like for mine. So yeah, that's pretty cool. This is like, I think one of the newer ones they added. So I can do stuff like this now to enter in a date. Maybe I'm putting in a date for my birthday. But yeah, so I put like 2005. But yeah, that's just a simple example. So yeah, that's pretty much covering everything I wanted to discuss for today's camp. Looks like there are no more questions. So yeah, thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you had a good time. Next camp, what we're discussing is, let me try to remember. Next camp, we're discussing, I think actually we're going to text editor next camp. But yeah, so we're gonna be leaving Code Playground next camp. Stay tuned in for that, and I'll talk to you guys later. So, goodbye.